Hi, welcome to this Facebook Live. I'm Dr. David Purvis, and please say hello when you're able to jump on because I won't know that you're there. And it's always nice to know that there are people on the other end of this process because otherwise it can feel like you're just talking to yourself. I'm Dr. David Purvis, and today we're going to talk about emotional regulation. Hi, welcome. Say hi. Give me a heart or a kiss or something or other. Just we're going to be talking about. Hi, Louise. Uh, Preventing emotional burnout, perfectionism, and I'm going to bring it. Actually, hi Amanda. Hi Steph. I'm going to bring it all together, and we're going to talk about affect regulation. But first, just while we give people an opportunity to come on, I just last minute had a question sent to me. I want to know how to stop the cycle of high anxiety or panic when it's full steam ahead and it feels like there's nothing else that comes into your mind. So, how to stop the anxiety when it's full steam ahead? Okay, um, I guess the answer is not to let it get full steam ahead. And I know that the person who asked that question, hi Julie, the person who asked that question is an anxiety wizard. And so I'd say we need to work to not allow the anxiety you get to the top of the mountain. So a panic attack is the top of the mountain, right? You have ramped up your anxiety to the point where you're at the pinnacle. It can't get any higher. But of course, with a panic attack, you actually don't have any threat because it's not an external threat. So we want to realize that early on and to undercut the sort of take the feet out of the panic attack, take the feet out of the rising anxiety. And we do that by, just thinking about being safer than you feel you are, and by standing back, by doing grounding exercises, by getting some distance from the experience. Anxiety is an interior experience, right? It's not an external threat experience, and therefore you have all the tools within you to be able to reduce the level of anxiety that you feel so you don't get to the top of the mountain. Hi, if you've jumped on, say hi, please. Let me know who's who's on. Give me some kind of say howdy hoody. Now, um, I hope that answers the question. When you're at the top of the mountain, you're a bit stuck because you've already put a lot of effort into getting there. Don't go up the mountain, would be my advice. Do everything you can do to keep yourself fairly stable and fairly kind of low key. Which brings us to this critical idea. Can you manage your emotions? So give me a yes or a no, or some other kind of idea, right? Can you manage your emotions? Now, the reason I ask this question is that at the heart of every psychological problem, every psychiatric problem, everything is the difficulty in managing emotions. And so we even go as far as having, something called um, unstable personality, where emotions are really like a roller coaster. Okay, so can you manage your emotions? Anyone? Can anyone manage their emotions? Let me know. And the reason I ask that is because it's extremely important. Now, speaking about preventing emotional burnout, what is emotional burnout? Well, it's got to be the consequence of chronic stress, because stress and chronic stress is the journey that you go on. Ah, Steph, you cannot manage your emotions. Good, well done. um, uh, Emotional burnout is the end point. Again, it's a journey, right? It's the end point of chronic stress. So if you're chronically stressed, eventually you'll get to a point of exhaustion. It could be emotional exhaustion, it could be physical exhaustion. Here's a question for you. Why don't zebras get ulcers? I've asked that question before. High emotion, no, Amanda, thank you. Why don't zebras get ulcers? So zebras live, let's say, on the Serengeti in Africa, right? And there's predators, always predators around. But why don't they get ulcers? Why actually don't they suffer from stress? What would you think the answer would be? Well, this was a question posed by a famous stress researcher called Robert Sapolsky. I think could be 40 years ago now actually, and he basically said uh, zebras don't get ulcers because they don't suffer chronic stress; they suffer acute stress. Now, acute stress basically means that a pride of lions, is hunting a zebra. The zebra responds with a massive stress response, and whoops, it saves itself, or it doesn't. But then after that stressor is over, it just goes back to normal. It just goes back to eating grass and doing its own thing. Human beings have been around as long as zebras, and our physiology, our biology, is the same as it was probably a million years ago. And our biology was not designed to manage chronic stress. It was designed to manage acute stress from an environmental source, right? Now, bear in mind, those of you who are not that familiar with my work, there are two basic realities. There is external reality, which is my bookcase, and then there is internal reality, which is what happens inside your head, okay? Now, zebras don't have an internal reality. And a million years ago, we didn't have an internal reality because we had no language, we had no imagination, we had no sense of self. Because that's quite a recent development. So we were designed to suffer from external stresses. Now, to experience external stresses, and our stress response was designed to manage external stresses. How much actual threat, environmental threat, do you have now? How much actual environmental threat do you have? I would suggest that you don't have very much at all. And the reason you don't have very much at all is because actually we're pretty safe. We live in a pretty safe environment. Now, I appreciate we've got the COVID thing going on, but actually it's not such a threat for most people that it could be really classified as an external stressor in the same way that a lion attack would be. So our stress is entirely internally created, okay? And we're able, because we have such fantastic imaginations, to create chronic stress for days and weeks and months and even years. Now, how to prevent emotional burnout? Well, the answer is do not generate long periods of chronic emotional stress, right? Do not generate all that stress for yourself, and then you will not get to the point of burnout. Now, you might say, well, I can't help it. I'm just really, really stressed. And whenever anybody ever says that to me, I say, okay, well, what is it that is about your life that means you need to be stressed? Why do you actually need to be stressed? Oh, busy job, blah, 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 blah. Okay, right. None of that's really relevant. There are three elements to stress. The first thing is the stressor. Now, it can be an environmental stressor, so like an external reality stressor, or it can be an internal reality stressor. The second thing is what that stressor means to you. And the third thing is your response to it. Now, an external stressor might be, in actual fact, and this is actually a genuine external stressor, commuting on the train. On the days when I used to commute, and some of you have commuted, commuting on the train's a stressor. Getting up early, commuting on the train, 2 hours this way, 2 hours, driving long distances all the time, that's a stressor. Working in an environment that's noisy or dusty, or, these are proper toxic environmental stressors, okay. We don't do that so much anymore. So it's likely to be that your stressor is an internal stressor. Now, you might have a bad boss, fair enough, and I appreciate that some people have a bad boss and whatnot, but a lot of times the stressor is internal. Now, what does that stressor mean? And when I say what does it mean, it's likely to mean something like, I'm going to get found out, I'm going to be sacked, I'm going to lose everything, I'm going to be ridiculed, I'm going to be embarrassed, I'm going to be ashamed. Typically, it means something significant, really significant for you as a person. And then that ramps up your physiology, your physiological response. And when your physiology is ramped up, that's kind of your experience of stress. That's the thing that kind of keeps you awake at night, that makes it difficult to get on with stuff. So, how do we manage stress? Well, I'm going to suggest to you that, and I've done this with quite a lot of people, and it really works quite well, and it's pretty simple, right? We can intervene at the stressor, and we may be able to do something or not. We can intervene at what the stressor means to you, and we can intervene at the physiological response. So um, I'm going to suggest this, right? Is your interpretation of what the stressor means accurate? I will get the job, I'm a failure, people will see that I don't know what I'm doing, I feel like a fraud. Is any of that true, actually? I've done this for years and years and years, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people who are massively stressed, and I've not yet found one example of what the stressor means which is accurate. I feel like a failure. Yeah, I know. Are you a failure? No, I'm really successful. I'll get found out. What will they find out? They'll find out that I don't feel confident about myself. Do you know what you're doing? Are you an expert? Yes. We've got to challenge the meaning of the stressor, right? Because actually, it's always wrong. And the other thing we can do is I find that the level of stress that you experience is got a big element of habit to it. It's kind of habitual. And so you just get used to being, stressed. And so I have something called the stress monitoring diary, which I show to people. And I'm basically saying, okay, in the morning, say to yourself, how stressed am I? 0, not at all. 10 is as bad as it could be. Where are you? 8, 7, 8. Okay, all right. Why do you need to be 7 or 8 out of 10? Which is actually a high level of stress. That's chronic stress. Why do you need to be 7 or 8 out of 10? I don't. Okay, right? So why don't we actually then do something to bring it down? We don't need to remain highly stressed. It's just we just accept it as being, well, that's just what it is. I'm stressed. It's not just what it is. It's what you're allowing to happen in your life, and you're kind of accepting that you're stressed. Okay, you can do exactly the same job, but with a level of stress of 3. You don't need to be 7 or 8. Nobody needs to be 7 or 8. Stress can be made optional if you know how to exercise the option. And that's what measuring it and managing it does. So I've talked a bit about how to manage stress, and of course there's lots of tools that I've got, and you'll find tools floating around all over the place, and in Anxiety Wizard, etc., to help you to manage the stress. But here's the thing: I want to bring this round now because I'm going to talk about physical things. Have you noticed there's a relationship between your, let's call it your physiological arousal, which we could call anxiety or stress, and your health, your physical health? Have you noticed a relationship between that? Now, I know Vanessa says that she's in constant sympathetic mode, even when sleeping. Um, so doctors have said my body's in constant stress. I think it's caused physiologically, but it's obvious it's from psychological stress. Okay, okay. And Steph says, I feel confident but can't seem to stop the physical feeling of stress. Well, I think that both of you would be good candidates for doing the stress monitoring diary, which is simply teaching your brain to experience a lower level of stress. Now, your brain does not care how much stress you experience. Your brain, it really does not care. It can give you 10 out of 10 every day. It can give you 1 out of 10 every day. It makes no difference to your brain. It's just basically following the instructions that you give it. And I know the instructions are unconscious, but nevertheless, you are instructing your brain to give you stress. Okay, so a few people have found that there's a relationship between stress and health problems. How can that be? Stress is let's call it a psychological event, right? Anxiety, we'll call it a psychological event. And health problems, it's your body. But of course, a lot of times what the medical model and what doctors have done is they've failed to make the connection between your mind, your brain, and your body, the mind body connection. And stress affects your body in like numerous ways. But chronic stress also affects the immune system. It's called the study of this is called psychoneuroimmunology, but it affects the immune system. It affects the respiratory system, it affects the digestive system, it affects the reproductive system. Stress affects everything, and it does that through hormones. The hormones are released into your bloodstream and they make effects everywhere, often through adrenaline and cortisol. And the very first question I had, yep, absolutely, Louise, stress hormones affect the body. The first question I was asked was how to stop, how to deal with panic when you're really the peak of the panic mountain. Well, is don't allow the stress hormones, the cortisol and the adrenaline to be released in your bloodstream, which basically means manage it further down the mountain so that you feel more in charge. Okay, so um, let's have a think about emotional regulation and the immune system. Now, the immune system has to make a decision between what is you and what is not you. So the immune system's job is to say, this is me, that is not me. Self, not self, right? And your immune system attacks what is not self. It attacks foreign bodies. That's what its job is, okay? And it does that at all sorts of levels. And there are all sorts of immune system characteristics floating around your body all over the place. Now, if you experience chronic stress, it has a dampening effect on your immune system. It has an effect upon your immunity. And if you have enough chronic stress, and if you have enough like important psychological stressors, then it's likely to be the case that you're going to cause, or at least it's going to release um, uh, problems into your system that you kind of don't really want to have. And I'm thinking of autoimmune problems. Now, if you have enough chronic stress, the whole system becomes confused enough that your autoimmune system can start to attack itself, which is an autoimmune problem. Okay, the immune system starts to get confused about what's you and what's not you. And I've been doing quite a lot of research on autoimmune problems of late, and it's kind of interesting because this ties in with the idea of perfectionism, etc. Um, Quite a lot of people have studied the characteristics of folks who suffer from rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune problems. And there's one of the characteristics which is really interesting. It's called Stoicism. It, a lot of times people are quite tough. They just get on with it, just sort of suck it up. But what we've also found is that um, there's a significant element of perfectionism in people who suffer from rheumatoid arthritis. Denial of hostility, it's like, not allowed to be angry. Fear of anger, feelings of inadequacy, emotional deprivation, potentially at some point in the past, and emotional rejection, and a difficulty in recognizing and understanding, describing emotions. So we've created a link here between the immune system and some psychological characteristics. And I think it's pretty well established in the literature for the people who are interested in that kind of thing. Although I have to say that in my very limited experience with I say very limited, with autoimmune diseases, often the psychological is overlooked by the medical system. And I have to say that I have found in my experience that the psychological, paying attention to the psychological is beneficial. Now, here's an interesting idea. The immune system has to decide what is you and what is not you. Now, suppose I gave you a little hammer and I said, just hit yourself on the head. I'm guessing because you're decent folks, you go, oh, okay, Dave, and you hit yourself on the head. I say, okay, can you do it again, please? Well, why? Well, it hurts. Yeah, hit yourself on the head. No, I'm not hitting myself on the head. Well, why won't you hit yourself on the head repeatedly with a hammer? Well, it hurts. Yeah, what other reason? Well, damage my head? Yes. Now, the immune system has to decide what is you and what is not you, and it attacks what is not you. When you're doing things like perfectionism or self-criticism, you're basically attacking yourself. You're saying, I. You're kind of denying reality, and you're saying, I am not this, right? I should be something other than I am. You're kind of going self, not self. You're saying, well, I shouldn't be like that. That's not me. So that's a self-attack. That creates stress, and that then has an immune system change. So with things like perfectionism, um, and other kind of really strong kind of emotional processes or programs that you run, it's like you're attacking yourself. Now, does it make sense to repeatedly hit yourself on the hammer? No. Hit yourself on the head with a hammer? No, because it damages your head. Does it make sense to repeatedly criticize yourself? What do you think? What does anybody think? Does it make sense to repeatedly criticize yourself? If you follow my kind of metaphor that is like hitting yourself on the hitting yourself on the head with a hammer, it damages you. And it damages you both psychologically and it damages you physically because you're affecting the 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 endocrine system that releases the hormones into your bloodstream. Does that seem to be a sensible way to spend some time? Okay, yeah, no, but habit. Fair enough, Louise. Yes, and yes, Vanessa, I hear you. Um, okay, I would suggest then that what we need to do is to think about stopping hitting yourself on the head with a hammer. Stop self-attack. Now, I was talking to someone today, and it was kind of interesting because um, they were saying that they spend a lot of time arguing and reasoning inside the head about what people think. And we decided that these what people think, these people don't exist. They're actually figments of imagination. They're imaginary characters that you're having conversations with, right? And those characters, because they're critical characters, never say anything nice. Is there any point to doing that? No. So self-criticism is a sort of a characteristic that we really want to focus a bit of attention on stopping. Now, bringing us back to perfectionism, which was kind of the original bit of the question, how to overcome perfectionism. Right. There are some characteristics of perfectionism that allow us to have an input and to make some changes. So the first one is that there's a tendency with perfectionism, if you're not careful, to have a fixed mindset as opposed to a flexible or a growth mindset. So a fixed mindset is it's this or it's that. It's right or it's wrong. You can do it or you can't do it. People can change, people can't change. People never change. And a fixed mindset is kind of unhelpful because it's inflexible. Whereas a growth mindset allows for some change to occur. Okay, so we would want to practice thinking about, at least being aware of, a fixed mindset as opposed to a growth mindset. I often find that perfectionists are motivated by fear as opposed to motivated by achievement. Now, I always find that perfectionists are highly effective, highly efficient, highly intelligent people, but they're running the wrong mental program. They think that being a perfectionist is what makes them successful, when actually what makes them successful is being intelligent, being efficient, being effective, putting effort into what they do. So we actually don't want to be motivated by fear, and we've got to own that. We've got to recognize it. I I sometimes look like a mind reader, right? Because perfectionists say, well, I did this, and it wasn't good enough. Yeah, but it's never good enough, is it? Because you set impossibly high standards for yourself, which you commonly fail to meet. Therefore, being a perfectionist is always offering you the possibility to feel like a failure. You do all or nothing thinking. Now, in Anxiety Wizard, in my work, we call it faulty thinking, which is basically it's this or it's that. So if I'm talking about perfectionism, I'll say there's basically only two places to be. One is perfect, and the opposite of perfect, of course, because perfect's a superlative, the opposite has to be really, really negative. The opposite is failure. And so people try to maintain this polarity, this position around the pole of perfect, because they don't want to go to failure. Yeah, but there are more than two places to be, right? Two is just the number that we tend to fall into, right? Good and bad, light and dark, heaven and hell, man and woman. So we tend to fall into these. And it's actually probably not just man and woman. We tend to fall into these binary characteristics. I'm going to say rigid and flexible. Now, what is the only tree that's standing on the beach after a tidal wave has passed through the tropical island? And I'm sure you all know this. um, I agree. Criticism is ingrained, and don't do things because it can't live up to high standards. I understand that too, but we've just got to make some changes because it's like hitting yourself on the head with a hammer. You only need to do it once to know it hurts, but to do it repetitively is not going to make much difference to an outcome. It's still going to hurt, and it is actually damaging. The only tree left standing on the beach after a tsunami has gone through is a palm tree. Because a palm tree. Yes, well done, Louise. You got it just in time before I revealed the palm tree. A palm tree is flexible. An oak tree is inflexible. If you're a perfectionist, and if you're a strong perfectionist, you're an oak tree. This is how it has to be. But actually, you're much better served by being a palm tree. Because uncertainty is always available. And the rigidity and the sort of the inflexibility of a palm tree is typically not that useful. And finally, I think perfectionism requires a lot of self-criticism and a lot of negative thinking. And we've already said that it's like a self-attack. Now, I find this idea of self-criticism as to be self-attack, and it's like hitting yourself on the head with a hammer. You just wouldn't do it. So that gives us a sort of a possibility of making some changes. So those are kinds of ideas about how we would tackle perfectionism. None of them are, like shiny new inventions, but we'll find them all in Anxiety Wizard in one form or another, and we can work on them all. The trick is to practice a bit, to keep engaged with the process. Now, I started by talking about emotional regulation. I think that at the heart of every psychological problem is the inability or the difficulty in regulating and managing emotion. Now, you might struggle with panic, anxiety, stress, OCD, um, depression, any kind of problem. There is always going to be an emotional regulation problem. And I think it'd be really useful and really interesting to start to think about managing your emotion, as opposed to thinking about the symptoms or eating cheese because it's good for you, or any kind of other kind of sort of solution. Managing your emotion is going to be one of the things that's really important. Now that brings me to the question that Steph asked. Steph's a new member. Welcome, Steph. Nice to have you with us. Welcome to the Active Self-Help Movement. Steph wakes with anxiety. Now, we've had this conversation at least once and possibly 2 or 3 times. Why on earth would you wake with anxiety? I mean, you're in bed, which potentially is the safest place for you to be. Okay, right. During the day, your conscious mind suppresses anxiety-related thoughts, but your unconscious mind is running a program that's telling you you are not safe, or you're at some risk, or that you're in some threat. Now, if you're just new to the kind of the active self-help approach, you might not necessarily have yet come across my idea of anxiety. Anxiety is an overestimation of threat. Now, if you feel threatened, but you can't find the threat, it's tempting to kind of push that down and just get on, be busy, stay busy, or whatever. But when you're asleep, your conscious mind is asleep, and so your unconscious mind, which is basically your brain, is able to continue to run those programs. And because your conscious mind can't suppress the ideas of anxiety, the anxiety comes up in dreams potentially, but then you wake with anxiety. It can wake you with panic attacks even. I've known people wake from sleep with a panic attack, and yet have no kind of idea of what they were dreaming about. So, some people asked me about this probably a couple of years ago now. And so I developed a tool called the Kilimanjaro Experiment. Now, there's a form of treatment called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, And EMDR uses what's called bilateral stimulation to process emotions. So I took the principle of EMDR and I created some EMDR music. And the music, in principle, goes from one side of your head to the other. And then I created a journey uh, up Kilimanjaro, which is a guided imagery journey. And I put the two together, and it's called the Kilimanjaro Experiment. So what you do is you put this on, you put headphones on last thing at night in bed, and you listen to the Kilimanjaro Experiment. That's basically it. And the reason it's called the experiment is that a group quite early on in Facebook, when I was doing the Panic Pit Stop group, a group of people did the experiment every night for a week. And on average, they found that their level of waking with anxiety was reduced by 50%. So that's after a week. So if you want to do the Kilimanjaro experiment, Steph, if you send me an email to panicpitstop100@gmail.com, which is the email on the mailings I've been sending out about this, I'll send you a link to the Kilimanjaro experiment. Typically, you'll find it in Anxiety Wizard. So if you join Anxiety Wizard, you'll find it under the sleep module. But I'll send it to you as a taster so you can see how you get on with it and see if it helps you. Um, the and what happens is I've known people actually I've known people use the Kilimanjaro experiment every night because after a little bit it becomes a cue to go to sleep. And so people say to me, oh, I can't get past the zebras. I can't even get to the foothills anymore. I'm just out like a light. And they wake up feeling good. So the Kilimanjaro experiment is a sort of it's an interesting attempt. I've got other ones as well, but that's sort of the one that seems to be the most popular. So I hope that answers that question for you, Steph. Yes, Louis says Kilimanjaro journey audio works. You wake chilled, no longer wake with panic attacks. Oh yeah, okay. Uh, waking with anxiety and panic attacks. I get the hell of a lot. I get that a hell of a lot. I find my dreams are so vivid and upsetting. Okay, well, Vanessa, go into the sleep module in Anxiety Wizard and load Kilimanjaro into your device or whatever and listen to it last thing at night with headphones on. It typically works really well and there's no downside to it. You can also use it, for relaxing during the day, but I have other EMDR audios for that. Okay, so I've been on for a half an hour. I think we'll draw it to a close. Thank you for joining me. We haven't done a Facebook Live for a while. I hope that I've answered the questions that you put. And I just kind of want to finish off with this. Psychological problems like panic, anxiety, depression, stress, or whatever, they are treatable and they are amenable to a solution. The thing about active self-help is we regard them as problems to solve. And when you start thinking about any problem as a problem to solve, you always get some mileage because you're turning it in. You're turning it from a subjective problem where I don't really understand what's happening, I just feel horrible, into an external problem where you go, actually, okay, let's work on this. And so, for instance, if you think of the list of things we did on perfectionism, we can work on all of those, and you'll find all of that stuff in Anxiety Wizard, and you can then actually make some changes yourself. Last week I published, maybe even this week, I published some stuff about developing a language to be able to understand the problems that you struggle with. And that's basically what self-help is, right? It's just developing a language to be able to more carefully and more efficiently understand the problem that you have. If you stick with just saying, well, I'm anxious, nothing much you can do about that. But if you say, actually, anxiety is an overestimation of threat, I am not at risk, I am not under threat, therefore I need to recalibrate my brain to be less anxious, all of a sudden we have things that we can do. And there's tons of tools that you can use to do that. And they work. Some of them work really easily and work really well. And we keep chipping away. Not one tool will not take you the whole way. That's why we have a lot of tools, and you just use them. And when you get fed up, you use a different one, and you chip away. And in the end, you feel a lot more on top of things. So I hope you found this interesting. Please leave some more comments and share this with anybody who's interested. And if if you're open to changing your life experience, I hope to see you on Inside Anxiety Wizard, and leave comments and let me know how you get on, and I'll be really happy to interact with you. So thank you. Good night.